Now let's talk about the very last Java keyword related to exceptions. We have looked at try, catch, finally, throws, and now let's look at throw. So there are two keywords which sound alike, throws and throw. As a quick revision, the throws keyword with an S is only used in the method signature. Okay, for example, in this case, I'm declaring method 1, and in my declaration, I'm specifically saying that if you call method 1, be ready that I may throw back to you, the caller, these two types of exceptions. Okay, the found not found exception or the number format exception. You can specify more than one exception using a throws keyword. You just have to separate them using commas. You can have more exceptions, comma, A exception, comma, B exception, and so on. Okay, or just throws exception with a capital E. That will include all the different kinds of exceptions. So the throws keyword is only used in method signatures. Now the throw keyword, on the other hand, is only used within a method. Okay, we'll take a look at this very soon. By the way, we talked about exception propagation and stuff like that. So how do we originate an exception? In other words, when you called integer.parseIn, okay, and you pass in a string, you are told by the documentation that calling the parseIn method may result in an exception being thrown back to you, the caller. So how does the code in parseIn actually look like? So here is the source code for the parseIn method. I'm looking at integer.java. Okay, this is you are able to take a look at the source code of the library classes. Okay, src.zip is in this zip file called src.zip. Now there are two parseIn methods. This is not the one which we have used. Okay, we use the one which takes in a single parameter, a string. Okay, there are two parseIn methods. Yep, this is the one we're using. Okay, we pass in only one string. However, what it does is it calls the other parseIn method, okay, and passes in the string which you have passed in, comma 10. What is 10? Basically 10 is the radix, or just the base, okay, the number base. So by default we are using base 10. If you're not familiar with bases like octal, binary, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so basically this method is being called, and look at these statements. This is how the exception is being generated in parseIn and thrown back to the caller. Alright, they are checking if the input string is null. I'm going to use the new keyword to create a new number format exception. Okay, a number format exception object is being called, and it has a constructor which takes in a string. Okay, basically this is the message. And I'm going to use the throw keyword without the S to throw this newly created instance of number format exception back to the caller of parseIn. Alright, the throws keyword is used here in the method signature to tell everyone that if you call me, get ready to catch a number format exception, because I may throw it to you if something goes wrong. The throw keyword is used in the method to actually perform the throwing of an exception object. Okay, in the subsequent part of this lecture, we're going to talk about how to write exception classes and how to throw exception objects which we are going to create. So I'm going to give an example here, a no stock exception. Okay, remember there are two categories of exceptions, checked and unchecked exceptions. An unchecked exception extends runtime exception, or a child of runtime exception. All right. In other words, in this case, no stock exception is a runtime exception, and hence no stock exception is an unchecked exception. So if you want to write your own exception classes, you can in my example here, I'm going to write an unchecked exception. So I extended runtime exception. I've provided a single constructor which takes in a string, and I'm going to call the constructor in runtime exception, or the immediate parent class, which takes in the string. Now this string is the message, okay, which describes the problem. So when I create a new instance of no stock exception, I can pass in a message. And this message can be retrieved using the get message method in the catch block. Alright, so this is a no stock exception, and I've included a comment here saying that it will be thrown by the vendor when there's no stock. And here is the external vendor, external vendor class. Now this vendor sells computers to a company, a purchasing department of a company. So it basically has two attributes: the number of remaining computers left and a cost of the computer. Okay, a constructor which basically sets these two attributes to default values, a getter for the cost of computer. So a purchaser will basically call the get cost of computer first to check if they have enough money before calling the order computer method, which starts the procurement process. So in the order computer method, I'll check if I have enough stock. If remaining computers equals to 0, what do? I create a new no stock exception, pass in a message which describes the problem, and use the throw keyword to throw the newly created exception to the caller of order computer. Okay. Otherwise, if I have remaining computers, I'm going to reduce my inventory count by 1 and do other stuff which completes the order process, send a invoice, whatever. Okay, that's not what we're interested in. So this is the external vendor class, which makes use of the no stock exception. Now, I've written another class called purchasing exception. All right, and purchasing exception also extends runtime exception, making it an unchecked exception. It is thrown by the purchasing department when there's a problem with purchasing. So the purchasing department belongs to your company, all right, which works with an external vendor. Here is the purchasing department class. It keeps two attributes: available funds, all right, if there is enough money, then they can purchase a computer, and external vendor, let's call it V. All right, so the constructor basically sets V to an instance of an external vendor. The purchasing department works with an external vendor, okay, which provides computers, and available funds will take in the initial value passed into the constructor of purchasing department, and we have only one method here: purchase computer. So I will call the vendor's get cost of computer, and I will check if I have enough money. Now, if there is not enough, should be lesser. If there is not enough money, that means my available funds is below the cost of a computer, I create a new purchasing exception and throw it to the caller of purchase computer. Otherwise, I'll continue with my order by calling the vendor's order computer method, and of course I deduct my available funds accordingly. So just be aware that line 22, order computer, might throw a no stock exception. Now in this case, no stock exception is not caught here. There's no try block in the purchase computer method of purchasing department. It's not caught here. Hence, what's going to happen is that this no stock exception will be propagated back to the caller of the purchase computer method, which means that purchase computer might throws to the caller two types of exceptions: purchasing exception or no stock exception. Now, no stock exception originated from the external vendor's order computer method. All right. So I've just written a main method, a simple one, the main method, which creates a new purchasing department object. Okay, I pump in a default of $10,000. That's probably enough for 5 computers. Okay, because my external vendor has a cost of computer set to 2,000 bucks. All right, so this is enough for 5 computers, and I have a while loop here which tries to purchase 5 computers. So I call the purchase computer method of the purchasing department object, which will in turn check if there is enough money. All right, not enough money, it will throw a purchasing exception. If there's enough money, it will try to call the vendor's order computer method, which might throw back a no stock exception. Okay, either way, all these statements are in a try block, and if there's an exception, you'll be caught. Here, this catch block will catch all types of exceptions, including a no stock exception and a purchasing exception. Why? Because a no stock exception is an exception, a purchasing exception is an exception. On line 18, I'm going to print a stack trace. Now, like what I've said previously, in a real program, you do not print a stack trace to the console. Okay, you probably would want to log the stack trace. Okay, you might want to show an error message. You can call the get message method of E to print out the message. All right, but for this purpose, I just want to look at the stack trace because I want to look at the counts, the line numbers. Okay, let me save everything. Oops, integer is. Let me close this. Let me save everything. All right, everything is saved already, and compile test. Let me run test. Okay, as the program runs, okay, we have got this try block, this while loop running on line 11, and 1 computer purchased successfully, 2 computers purchased successfully, 3 computers. Now, during the fourth attempt, when the purchase computer method is called, all right, the order computer method of the vendor is called. Here it is. There is not enough stock, and a new no stock exception gets thrown back to line 22 of purchasing department, which is then propagated back to line 12 of the main method. Okay, look at the stack trace. This is the exception which was caught. All right, and like what I've said, this line, okay, is the line which created exception, line 19 of external vendor. Here it is, line 19 of external vendor. And this is the line in purchasing department which called the order computer method, line 23 of purchasing department. Here it is, line 23 of purchasing department. Okay, and of course, line 12 of test is the one which called the line 23 of purchasing department. So we have the stack trace. So this is a situation whereby no stock exception was actually thrown by the external vendor and propagated by purchasing department to test. Okay. Now let's assume that there's enough stock, but not enough money. Okay. Let's say I have only 3,000 bucks, and I'm trying to purchase 5 computers. I'm saving it, compile, and run. So this time with only 3,000 bucks, I was able to purchase only 1 computer. Each computer costs 2,000 bucks. So during the second time, the purchase computer method of the purchasing department is called. Okay, here it is. This condition will be false. No, this condition will be true. And I'll go to line 20, which creates a new purchasing exception, and throw it back to the caller. Doesn't even get to call the order computer method of the vendor. Look at the stack trace. You see? So the exception originated from line 20 of purchase computer, this statement. Okay, so I've shown an example, a somewhat slightly complex example whereby I written two exception classes, okay, one thrown by the external vendor and one thrown by the purchasing department, okay, independently. So what happens if purchasing exception or no stock exception is a normal checked exception? So I'm going to change no stock exception to a checked exception now. Save it. Let's apply what we have learned. Okay, clear everything, compile, test again. Seems to work. Why? Oh, hold on. Let me compile the no stock exception again, and compile the external vendor. Okay, it should not work because apparently when I tried to compile test, right, it did not pick up the change in no stock exception. Okay, this is the error I'm trying to show you. When I compile external vendor, it says on line 19 of external vendor there's a problem. Okay, the problem is no stock exception is not reported. Now the difference here is now no stock exception is a checked exception. So let's go to line 19 of external vendor. Now they're trying to say a no stock exception is created here. Since it is a checked exception, it must either be caught or declared to be thrown out of order computer. Now it does not make sense for you to catch no stock exception here. If you try to do this, okay, that would be absolutely crazy. And you try to do something here, whatever. This will be absolutely stupid. Now why? You are throwing an exception and catching it yourself. Now the whole point about throwing a newly generated exception is so that the exception can be thrown back to the caller of this method, who can deal with it in whatever way it wants to. So if you see code which creates a new exception, throws it and catches it in the same method, it really does not make much sense. Okay? So what should be done now is to declare in the signature of order computer that, hey, if you call me, you might get a no stock exception thrown back to you. This will compile. Order computer will compile. When I try to compile external vendor, it works. Okay, but when I try to compile purchasing department, the same problem. We have seen this in a previous lecture. Okay, this statement here might cause a no stock exception, but it's not handed here. So you might want to specify no stock exception. You must specify that is going to be thrown to main, which will then catch it. So this should work. Alright, test should work as well because there's a catch block which catches all types of exceptions, including no stock exception. So this is a quick revision, the difference between a checked and an unchecked exception. So very easy. If you want to write a checked exception, extends exception, or any other class which is not a runtime exception. If you want to write an unchecked exception, in this case purchasing exception, just extends runtime exception, or any other subclass of runtime exception. Now, it is also possible, and some people do this, to catch an exception, do process it partially, and then propagate the exception. What do I mean? Let me give an example. I'm at the purchasing department here. So I know that order computer might throw a no stock exception, and I'm not going to propagate it to the caller of purchase computer. Alright, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to catch the no stock exception, do something to it. Maybe you might want to lock the problem here, lock it to some log file. Okay, and I want to create a new purchasing exception and pass in or maybe not e.get message, pass in a message, no stock, okay, on vendor's side. Okay, something like this. Now this is not uncommon. I catch an exception. I may want to do something with the exception, all right, and then I create a new exception. This time I create a new purchasing exception, okay, with a relevant message embedded inside and throw it out. So now purchase computer is likely to throw only a purchasing exception. Even if there's no stock, it is still a purchasing exception, but with the correct message embedded. All right, let's save all this. Uh, okay, let me increase the amount of money, $10,000, so that there is a no stock exception thrown. It's not enough money problem, but a no stock problem. Okay, let me run test and look at the stack trace. Okay, it is a purchasing department. It is a purchasing exception with the message no stock on vendor's side. Okay, you do not see a no stock exception. Okay, so this is a situation whereby the purchasing department wants to catch exceptions for the vendor, okay, and its responsibility is to throw back a purchasing exception if there's a problem with purchase, okay, whatever that problem is. Not enough money to purchase or not enough stock on vendor's side. Alright,